Andrew, do you want to tell everyone who you are, Andrew? Sure.
Good morning, everybody. In real life, I'm Andrew Clifford, but today I'm calling myself Richmond Rufus Watkins III, and I'm here to talk about the American elections from the point of view of the Southern Poverty Law Center, which is located in Montgomery, Alabama.
Thank you, Mr. Watkins III. And now we have also Amy. Who are you today, Amy? Oh, you are no longer Amy, you are Elaine.
Yes, so in real life, I'm Amy Jendrick, but today I am going to be Elaine Kamarck, who is a political and economics analyst at the Brookings Institution, which is a think tank based in Washington, D.C.
Okay, so we have already two very different perspectives here. And then we also have a third panelist, Jillian, with us. And I've given you the name, Jillian, of Gillian Jacobson. I hope you like it. Do you want to say hello and test your mic at the same time?
Yep, can you guys hear me? Okay, great. Yeah, thanks very much, Xiang. I'm happy to be able to keep my first name, even though my last name's been changed, but that's fine with me. And today I'm going to be, so Jillian Jacobson, former Canadian ambassador to the US. And I'm someone who's going to have spanned two different prime ministers in office. So Harper as a conservative and then Trudeau as a liberal, just for your information. And it's so great to see all these people here who I know from Paris and everywhere. Awesome. Thanks, guys.
Worlds are merging. It's really nice. And I will just be moderating the panel and kind of asking a few basic questions, but letting the panelists take the center stage. Okay, so let me know, Ronnie or Louis. Yep, Ronnie, is everyone ready to go? And if so, we can, I see we're already recording.
Yes, we're good to go.
Thank you. Jack, are you interpreting this one? No, okay. I'll be hosting and I think I made up a name for myself. Oh, I'm part of this online channel called The Elephant in the Room. I don't know, I was just inspired this morning. So that's who I'm going to be. Okay, so let's begin if our panelists are ready.
Eh bien, si nos panélistes sont prêts, nous allons pouvoir commencer. Je vois des pouces levés. Très bien.
Ladies and gentlemen, the much-awaited U.S. elections on November 3rd has come and gone, and though Joe Biden is now president-elect of the United States, he has garnered more than the needed 270 electoral college votes. The future is still far from certain. The blue wave that Democrats and pollsters had predicted never really materialized, and Mr. Trump has yet to concede his defeat, let's just say. On the Republican side, Mr. Trump would be the first president in nearly 3 decades who failed to secure a second term. I am your host, Xiang from The Elephant in the Room. We're an online channel featuring neutral, curated content. Join our other 500,000 subscribers to our Elephant family by subscribing and ringing the bell on YouTube. Every Saturday, we discuss hot topics in the realm of politics, the economy, and history. And going back to the elections, it's an event of historic importance with potentially far-reaching consequences for the United States, of course, but also Canada, where we're based, and the world. I have 3 very special guests today with me to discuss these events. Let me welcome our first guest, Mr. Richmond Rufus Watkins III. Hello, Mr. Watkins III. Would you like to say hello? And introduce
Yes, good
yourself.
morning, Ms. Gu. Thank you very much for the invitation. Very happy to be here today participating in this panel with everyone.
Hi. And we also have This is Jillian Jacobson, the former Canadian ambassador to the US. Would you like to say hello?
Hello very much. Hello, Ms. Gu. Thank you very much for having me today. And it's a real honor to be present with all these very esteemed colleagues. And I hope I'll have something to bring to the table today. Thank you.
I'm sure you will. Thank you very much. And finally, we have Elaine Kamarck. Hello, Elaine.
Hi, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm really excited to be here today, and I'm looking forward to hearing what my colleagues have to say.
Why don't we start with you, Elaine? What have you been following the elections closely, and what are your thoughts? What should we be looking forward to in the next couple of years?
So I think that, like many Americans, I feel like I'm still finally getting over the rush of this election week. It was a very difficult week for many people. I don't think we are used to, in this day and age, having to wait for anything, much less election results. And I'm sure you can see there's still bags under my eyes from being up at all hours, checking the counts, checking the counts, checking the counts. But I'm looking forward with a great deal of hope right now. And one of the things that we at the Brookings Institution have been working on are some of the potential reforms and ways to kind of change the political system in the United States. I think one thing that we've seen, not just over the past 4 years, but really over the past 10, 12 years, is a growing deep-seated mistrust of the US government and how the government operates, how different initiatives are carried out by the government, and how decisions are made. We also, this election, saw quite a great deal of mistrust and unease about the election and the electoral process. And while many people are calling for electoral reform, many people are talking about changing the electoral college system, I think that we need to go much deeper. And one of the things that we are talking about are some of the initiatives that this new president, who has such an important mandate before him, a mandate of healing, a mandate of unification, one of the things that he needs to look at is how to kind of rebuild this trust in the government. And we've talked about things from eliminating some of the at-will positions. We know that President Trump used these thousands of positions of people who serve at the will and at the pleasure of the president. He used them to kind of create this really deep-rooted allegiance to one man as opposed to a government, a country, a system. So he could work on eliminating some of those positions or reforming them to make them limited by terms, or changing how that system operates. We've also talked about bringing government performance standards and measurements into the discussion so that we're not just looking at policies and what ideas are being put forth by the government, but more importantly, what resources and authority and what actual concrete actions are being carried out by the government. But I think one of the most important things that this new president needs to do is to rebuild public service. So, and I'm not just talking about some of the simple things like the government shutdown of 2018, 2019, or even the many hiring freezes that have plagued different governmental departments, but simply rebuilding trust in public service and making young people want to work for the government. Millennials and Gen Z are no longer saying, show me the money. They're saying, show me the impact. They want to know that the government is a good place to work. They want to know that what the government is doing has an impact and has a meaning, not just in our country, but for the greater global society. We no longer live in an isolated country, and I am hopeful that new President Biden will bring this idea of a global society back to the American conversation. And a couple last important things. One thing that we are really pushing for is a change to the budget process. We want to restore some of this regular order to the budget process. We don't want to see any more of this shutdown budgeting where just in order to get a budget through for our country, we have to shut down the entire government for weeks on end. That needs to stop. We know that uncertainty and brinksmanship will always be tactics used by different parties, but we need to make sure that our government continues to run and doesn't have these gaps. So I think that he has a very important mandate. He has a lot of work to do. He has so many obstacles to overcome, things that have been thrown in his path. And I really hope that with a new president and with a new viewpoint of America's role in the world, we can start to rebuild some of that trust in government.
Certainly. Thank you very much, Jillian, for sharing your point of view. And let me just now turn to Mr. Watkins III. You may probably share a slightly different take. What do you think, Mr. Watkins III?
Well, it's interesting. I'd like to start by saying that I'd like to reflect on some of the points that you raised, Ms. Gu, in the introduction, talking about our view of the results and a look forward. And I will echo some of the comments of my colleague. Some of the things that we'd like to point out, especially in the American South, the state of Georgia, for the first time, voted Democratic for the first time in 28 years in a presidential election. In the state of Mississippi, where I hail from, voters decided to replace the state flag, which bore a Confederate symbol, with a new flag, which features a white magnolia. In the state of Florida, there was a gradual increase in minimum wage to $15 an hour. It was approved by voters in this election. And in the state of Alabama, where the Southern Poverty Law Center is located, racist language was removed from the state's constitution. That's something that voters decided to support in this election. As we look forward to the work that lies before the new Biden administration, we would like to work alongside the administration to ensure a couple of objectives. The first is to act now to confront hate and, as my colleague pointed out previously, to continue to rebuild trust in our democratic ideals in this nation. We'd like to promote a fair and just immigration system. We'd like to work to eliminate discriminatory barriers to voting. We saw a number of those barriers being erected in this election. And we'd also like to promote health and safety in the workplace, in our schools, in our communities, something that hasn't happened, particularly in the face of this pandemic. So at this point, I guess I can summarize my comments by saying that we would like to thank all of those whose actions, no matter how big or how small, helped to create a national culture that in this election showed an unwavering commitment to democracy. I think collectively the nation is holding its breath at this point. It's a moment perhaps to rest, recharge, and regroup. But soon we'll need to show that same continued effort that allowed us to achieve this victory and to work and to capitalize on this election and to energize a movement for justice and equality. In the words of the late Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, real change, enduring change happens one step at a time. And I think we are now collectively ready to take that next step.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Watkins III, for that very hopeful message and in your opening statement. I'd like now to give the floor to Mrs. Jacobson. Hello, Mrs. Jacobson. As we know, Canada and the US share the longest undefended border in the world, and you've seen two different prime ministers in office in your time. What do you think some of the elections or what kind of impact will it have on Canada or the Canada-US relationship?
Well, thanks very much for that, Ms. Gu. Geez, I think I'd probably need about at least an hour to talk about all the impacts that that this election is going to have on America's neighbor to the north. Thanks for getting that well-worn cliche out of the way. Longest unprotected border in the world. It's oft repeated, but still holds true. First of all, too, I'd just like to point out that I realize that there are a number of people working in the booths today in a number of languages. I'd like to thank them for that. I'd also like to apologize because I can see that you all have been very careful about the lighting that you're using for presentation. I see that my lighting is not too good. And I now know how important it is for interpreters to be able to see the person speaking, their face, their mouth. So that's probably not ideal for the interpreters, and I apologize in advance, but I'll try to speak a little more slowly. And the other thing I'm worried about is having a fly land on my head, but and not noticing it. But perhaps, you know, if any of you notice that, you can just let me know. It's really, I feel really lucky to be able to express myself here today, since I'm no longer in office, if you will, as an ambassador. I feel like I can be very honest about my own personal opinions. I will say that I did, so I was appointed by Prime Minister Harper back in 2013. And he was, so Justin Trudeau was elected in 2015, and therefore I spanned a couple of years on either side of those two terms. It was very interesting to see the two different approaches of those leaders. I got along very well with both of them. And to get back to the US elections then, I was, as you know, so as I said, I was appointed by Harper. So you can imagine from that he'd vetted me and realized that, you know, that I was a true red Republican, shall I say, because you have to remember that the red and blue colors represent exactly the opposite in Canada and the States. Red is liberal up here and blue is conservative. So yes, so I will admit, I will tell you now that I did vote for Trump in the 2016 election. And I did so with a great deal of hope and a great deal of conviction that, you know, he was talking about draining the swamp, and I totally agreed with that. And I know that, you know, as a 40-something white woman, I was not one of his target demographic group, if you will. He didn't really count on women. He wasn't targeting women, at least not in that sense, in the elections. And that was not part of his campaign either this time. So I have to say, too, that although I had high hopes, I quickly began to be disappointed in his actions. Let's see, how can I put this? I knew of the many drawbacks that he could bring to office, notably his personality, his egocentricity. I was pretty sure, though, I was quite confident in the number of checks and balances that are placed on the president when he takes office. You know, the people around him, the numerous sort of, you know, rules and regulations that come with this very high responsibility. And my confidence was ill-placed. You know, those checks and balances quickly crumbled away. He was much more powerful and more dangerous than I had thought. And I can tell you now that for the first time in my life, I did vote Democrat this time. And I'm really happy to see President-elect Biden take office. And I'm very hopeful that we'll have no more of this nonsense about aluminum tariffs and, you know, just sort of nasty trade negotiations. I really think that I'm not saying things will be perfect. I'm not saying there won't be any more Buy America or any of those other initiatives, but I certainly do look forward to a much improved relationship between our two leaders. And yeah, so those are my remarks, and always good to hear from you, Ms. Kamarck. I remember our meetings up at the Brookings Institute when I was in office. Mr. Watkins, I don't believe you were the pres of the center at the time back in 2013, but I certainly have to say that I really admire the work that your institution does. Anyone who works to stamp out poverty is a friend of mine. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Jacobson. Just going back a little bit to Mr. Watkins' remarks, as you said, in Georgia and Pennsylvania as well, some of the race was very tight, and both candidates were jockeying for position, with Mr. Biden finally getting the upper hand. But I can imagine some of your fellow countrymen may have a slightly different take, or what may you say to them, those who did not vote for Mr. Biden?
Well, the position of the Southern Poverty Law Center is not necessarily to placate any particular group or to speak to their needs or desires. Instead, we have a set policy agenda of changes that we'd like to see be implemented by the new administration and by Congress. As a matter of fact, the new administration, we recognize, has already been pointed out here by my colleagues, will be facing a number of substantial challenges. The first of these, of course, is the pandemic, which has had a disproportionate impact on the Black, Latino, and Indigenous communities. And the pandemic has made plain some serious inequities that these communities are facing in areas such as health, housing, in the workplace, and our financial and educational systems. These inequities must be addressed by the president and by Congress. The second great challenge was brought to light by the murder of George Floyd and a number of other men and women of color by various police forces. This in turn led to thousands of people taking to the streets to demonstrate and protest. I would argue that these protests have energized a decades-long movement that has been calling not for reform, but instead for a complete and thorough reimagining of policing and incarceration policies. What we're saying, and I think this is in line with Ms. Kamarck's statement, is that it is not enough for our Congress and administration to reform. Instead, they must act aggressively to reimagine how we can transform this nation into a truly just and fair one. And for that reason, we've put forward a presidential transition document that's entitled A Vision for a Just Future. And in the document, it outlines 6 areas where we feel there needs to be significant movement in policy and legislation. I'm only going to, in the time that's been allotted to me today, I'm only going to focus on one of these 6 policy areas, and that is the elimination of discriminatory barriers to voting. Under this rubric, we have a number of concrete actions that we'd like to see the new administration and the Congress take. The first of these is to pass the John R. Lewis Voting Rights Act of 2020. This legislation was passed by the House on December 6th of 2019, and its name was changed in July of this year, 1 week after the unfortunate passing of our colleague, Mr. Lewis. Now we would urge the Senate to pass the bill so that it does not wind up in what many are rightly calling Mitch McConnell's legislative graveyard. The second measure for electoral reform is to, as my colleague already pointed out, the abolishment of the Electoral College and instead the election of president by national popular vote. We're also proposing that Election Day be moved to a weekend and that it be made a national holiday. We'd also urge that voting rights be restored to formerly incarcerated persons regardless of their outstanding debt. Now, any political pundits who kept a close eye on this election might realize that the vote was given back to former prisoners, And then late in this election cycle, Florida Governor DeSantis introduced a sort of poll tax, essentially, that disenfranchised former felons if they hadn't paid off their court fees, their fines, or the restitution to their victims. So to conclude my remarks here today, I would say that we urge the new administration and Congress both to act aggressively in this policy area and the others that we've outlined in our report, the vision for a just future.
Thank you, Mr. Watkins. I think we can all agree that we can look forward to many changes ahead. Ms. Karmic, would you like to respond or add anything further to the conversation?
Well, I'd first like to thank Mr. Watkins for that really, really wonderful summary of a lot of the things that the Southern Poverty Law Center is fighting for. I think that many of us who are working in analysis institutions are seeing that these reforms are very necessary, not only in order to, as I said, rebuild some of this trust in the government, but also to make sure that our democracy is a healthy, functioning democracy. I think we saw with this election the importance of counting votes, the importance of reaching out to people in all ethnic groups, all genders, all walks of life, and particularly, as Mr. Watkins brought up, granting felons the right to vote. I think that those laws have been used for far too long to withhold people or to violate people's rights. So I'm going to be looking up this document on the Southern Poverty Law Center's website, the vision document. That sounds like something that would be very interesting for us to maybe incorporate into some of our policy work. But I did want to address one other issue, and it was a thing mentioned in passing, which was Mitch McConnell's legislative graveyard, which, what a great expression. We feel it. The problem is, we may be headed to a place where that graveyard will only continue to grow. Currently, we have a Senate that is truly just on a razor's edge. We have 2 runoff elections coming up in Georgia, and I know that Stacey Abrams and the Fair Fight Coalition are going to do everything they can to ensure that people vote. But a lot of these obstacles to voting still exist in Georgia. And we did see this amazing turnaround where Georgia was blue. I think I celebrated more than anyone else. I have a lot of family in the Southeast, so it was nice to see that change. But we still have a majority, well, we'll see in January, but it looks like we may still have a majority Republican Senate, which means a Senate that Mitch McConnell still has control over. And I think it will be quite a challenge for President-elect Biden to get some of this legislation pushed through and not just to continue contributing to this graveyard. So I think that's something we need to pay very close attention to, and something that we need to make sure doesn't hinder the efforts to reform our political and electoral system.
Thank you very much, Ms. Karmic. And time is running short. I have my next guest coming in 5 minutes, but I'd just like to open the floor here and see if anyone has any last comments before we call it a day. Yes, Ms. Jacobson, please go ahead.
Yeah, just very quickly, to wrap up, I really would like to commend Mr. Watkins on all the great work that they're doing down there. You know, it's good to see institutions such as yours sort of kind of fighting the tide in the South, because obviously you're often on the wrong side of public opinion down there. And, you know, and it's good to know that the think tanks such as Ms. Kamarck's are looking to you for policy advice. You know, this business about the poll tax in Florida is really just another blow. You know, it's kicking people when they're down when you're talking about, you know, ex-cons and people who have, who already come out with a record and debt. So they definitely should not be disenfranchised. I totally agree with that. Last thing, interesting to look at the electoral results on the US map and compare them to the electoral results in 2019 on the Canadian map. You've once again got these constant geographical divides. The vote is very regionalized, and that is certainly something that does nothing to contribute to, sort of the harmony or the understanding between the various regions of the country. We certainly both live in very, vast nations, and that can be a good thing, but we also see that there are a number of obstacles left to overcome. Thanks.
Thank you very much to all three of our great panelists. I commend all of you for your excellent work, and I'd like to wish you good luck in your future projects, but most importantly, please stay safe. Until next time, once again, I am Xiang from Elephant in the Room. Please stay tuned for our next guest coming up. Thank you very much.